Hey guys, I wanted to make a video with a whole bunch of random tips for both Mythic Plus in general and, more specifically, the Temple of Sethraliss. This is by no means a comprehensive video, although I'm sure I will eventually get around to doing that, so don't look at this video as a compendium of knowledge for this particular dungeon. My name's Brutal, and this is how you get good at Mythic Plus. Temple of Sethraliss is a fun dungeon for a lot of people out there. I think it's fun, as it's the kind of dungeon that doesn't really throw a lot of curveballs your way. Keep in mind that this video is not going to review the perfect route because it doesn't really exist. Each group will have a different composition of players, classes, and specializations, which offers a different assortment of kicks, knockbacks, hard CC, and so on and so forth. Just do what works for your group. The first pull in the dungeon sees you interrupting or CCing the Dust Devil's casts and sidestepping or CCing the Marksman's power shot. Some groups elect to pull the lone Stone Fist on the right up the ramp to be cleaved and AoE'd, but that's up to each group to determine the route and pull pattern they plan to employ. Just make sure you're using method dungeon tools and figure that out before the dungeon even begins. Regardless of which week of affixes you're dealing with, the first obelisk is always the blood of the corruptor, and it can help your group tremendously if you immediately run down the same flight of stairs and line of sight the mind-rend tentacles. By doing this, it forces them to stack, and you can AoE them down much more quickly than single targeting them up top. The remaining trash you pull is pretty straightforward, except you're also introduced to the Shrouded Fang NPC, which will stun whoever they encounter. And on top of that, they love cleaving one person who is also in melee with the tank. Be especially careful on teaming weeks, and be sure to kill the little hatchling that comes with the Shrouded Fang for your enemy force count. Also, don't be afraid to use things like Demon Hunter's Spectral Sight or a Hunter's Flare to deal with the Shrouded Fang's stealth mechanic as well. The first boss fight can be rough for a lot of groups. You'll start off on Adderus, but make sure you keep kicking Aspix's casts, using a damage reduction or immunity ability when he casts Conduction on a player, and find any other way to survive that you can for his Static Shock AoE. Adderus, as the first target of the fight, loves casting Cyclone Strike, and you'll have an easier time dodging that ability if you stand closer to him rather than being farther away, as you can just run through him when he turns toward you to cast it. He does a dash ability when you're fighting his counterpart that you need to step away from, and really you should be baiting his big AoE attack away from the melee pile if you're a ranged DPS player. On top of those mechanics, be sure not to attack the target that is currently benefiting from Lightning Shield, as it'll quickly ruin your day and you will die to some extreme damage that is being reflected back on you. After these guys are dead, most groups nowadays opt to skip the Krolisk Rider by sending a Stealth class or an Immunity class to the next obelisk. Drag that obelisk's NPC into the second boss's room and drop the portal wherever you see fit. For the next few minutes, it's just a matter of pulling the entirety of Merektha's room without dying to various mechanics. I recommend you don't stand in front of any Krolisk Rider who is pulled, as their Noxious Breath attack will slap you 10 ways to Sunday, and once they dismount, their cleave will do the same thing, so stay behind them. The Tender NPCs cast a heal, but you can largely ignore that, interestingly enough, unless you're just sitting on your interrupts for some weird reason. Your interrupts should, however, be used on the Incubator's Lightning in a Bottle spell. It leaves a nasty puddle on the ground that takes a few seconds to appear, but it deals damage immediately. It's easier to DPS through the mild heal that the Tender applies, and far more difficult to survive the Lightning in a Bottle puddle on the ground. On top of that, if you're a pet class, such as a hunter or a warlock, your pet will most likely die more than once during these pulls due to venomous spit. It sucks, I know, trust me. Res or resummon your pet and get back to work. And be sure not to stand in the Incubator's Pyrrhic Blast. it'll kill you. Once you're done with that room, you can throw something at the Nimbus behind the gate and pull it on top of the boss if you want, because for the most part, it does next to nothing. Just interrupt it or dispel it. As for the boss, be sure to pull it to a wall and don't stand in any of the green stuff on the ground once it starts appearing. Be ready to fear or stun anyone trapped by snakes, but here's a little pro tip for you hunters out there. You can actually place a freezing trap down if you're a hunter, and if you're selected for snake trap, it'll instantly break you out. I have no idea if any other classes or specializations can do anything similar to that, but look through your abilities and see what you can come up with. The boss will burrow underground at 70%, so move toward the center of the room and keep in mind that she'll charge a random player with 15 and 3 seconds left to go during her intermission phase. Snakes do spawn throughout this phase and they do need to be killed, and if they drop a dust cloud, just move out of it. Phase 2 is the simplest thing you've ever done. Just turn your character away from her when she casts Blinding Sand. At 40%, another intermission phase begins, and when she reappears, bring your backs back to a wall because she will be casting her poison at you once again, and you don't want that covering the entirety of the room. Snakes will spawn toward the end of this phase, so either CC them, ignore them, or pad your DPS meters on them. The next few polls consist of Stormcallers and Nimbuses, or Nimbi as I like to call them in the plural form. Interrupt the Stormcallers and kill them first. Interrupt and dispel the Nimbi whenever you can. Don't stand in any lightning circle you see appearing under your feet. After all the Stormcallers and Nimbi have been killed, the next couple of polls showcase one of the more difficult to deal with NPCs in Mythic Plus throughout this entire expansion, the Dervishes. They just deal a lot of damage, so be ready to heal, pop a defensive, and heal some more. Keep in mind if you're in melee, you need to stand as far away from the tank as possible, as the Dervishes leap onto the tank, or to whoever has aggro for that matter, and they deal large amounts of AoE damage. On top of all of that, they cast Electrocute, which deals a large amount of single target damage to whoever they target. You can actually outrange this if you stay 31 or further yards away, but keep in mind that means more casts will go onto fewer players as they remain in melee, so make smart choices in the moment for your group. The third boss, Galvast, forces you to move around a fair bit to soak beams of electricity that are being channeled from pillars that appear around the room throughout the fight. Coordinate with your group, preferably in Discord, and just soak the beams. Outside of that, there's really not much else going on, so don't die, have fun, kill the boss, and move on. And speaking of moving on, you actually need to walk back up the stairs to take this obelisk's NPC to the spark channeler up ahead. Once there, pop out of the Shadow Realm, interrupt him, and avoid his lightning puddles on the ground. As for this next area, I recommend you leave your healer and one DPS player at the portal that you just created. Have them go back into the Shadow Realm while your tank and the other 2 DPS players you've assigned run the eyeballs. Melee are especially good for this, as are a variety of range specializations, but either way, be sure to throw your eyeball to speed up the running process if you don't have some form of blink or fell rush ability. Once both eyeballs have been socketed, have your tank and whoever can't vanish or feign death intentionally die. If you have someone who can drop combat like a hunter with feign death, have them position themselves at the 4th and final obelisk. Once everyone has been rezzed and they've clicked on the portal to re-enter the Shadow Realm, have your hunter or whoever you've assigned click the final obelisk to activate it without aggroing any of the patrols in the area. Once everyone is back into the Shadow Realm and Voidweaver Malthier has spawned, drag her down to the final boss's room and kill her there, being sure to avoid any exploding scarabs on the way. In this final room, do your best not to allow casts to go off from any of the hexers. Pulling 2 at a time is generally safe as long as you're prioritizing one to be killed first. Make sure you are not interrupting the hexers if you're running with a protection warrior when they're also using spell reflection, as spell reflection does a ton of damage here, or anywhere it's used offensively for that matter. Once all 4 hexers are dead, you can start the fight by talking to the avatar of Sethraliss. This fight is incredibly simple, but it can go wrong in a heartbeat. No pun intended for anyone out there who pays attention to the mechanics or the names of the mechanics on this fight. This fight unfolds over 3 repeating phases, with the last phase seeing players receive a huge damage and survivability buff. For the first 2 phases, Kill the Guardians and Plague Doctors as they spawn, with emphasis usually being placed on the Guardians, as they do extreme damage to tanks. Interrupt the Plague Doctors regularly, and feel free to walk into any toad that spawns, as they love to run down your healer. You can kill them too, but running into them is not only faster, but it can also be safer depending upon when they're spawning and what your healer is doing at that moment. Be sure to avoid lightning circles on the ground, as you will die to them more often than not. During the healing portion of the fight, make sure anyone who can heal the Avatar of Sethraliss does. That includes you too, BM Hunters. Spirit Mend should be used as often as possible in this phase. Oh, and be sure to click the orb at the start of this healing phase too. Once you've killed 2 rounds of channeling Hoodoo Hexers, and you've healed the Avatar of Sethraliss to 100%, the third and final phase starts, and this is where it gets good. Have your healer run back up the ramp aggroing all 5 NPCs. There are 3 NPCs at the bottom of the stairs and 2 at the top. Be sure to get all 5 of them, assuming you need the enemy force count. Pull them back down into the boss's room and just AoE. Just AoE everything. During this third phase, you are essentially unkillable, so just plant your feet and burn the snot out of everything in front of you. Be sure to grip, knockback, or interrupt casters to pull them into the stack, into your AoE pile, which makes everything die that much faster. Other than that, congratulations, you finished the dungeon, you did it. I believed in you the whole time. Way to go. I hope you've enjoyed this incredibly simple Temple of Sethraliss review. Remember, there are dozens of routes you can take through this dungeon. Additionally, your group's composition will dictate how the run unfolds, so use method dungeon tools before you begin to plan out your route and get everything dialed in. Once again, my name is Brutal, and if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, post them in the comments below. I appreciate your time, and hope you found this video to be helpful. Swing by my Twitch channel, be sure to check out the description box below for more links to fun and helpful areas online. And as always, live well, be well, do well, and I'll see you in the next video.